Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this series. My name's Hilary Edgcombe and I work as a consultant anaesthetist in Oxford. I also have experience working clinically and also in training and research in low and middle income countries. As part of that, I have a regular commitment training anaesthetists who want to work in low resource settings, particularly in the context of natural disasters, conflict settings and in capacity building. We aim not only to give them expertise with drugs and kit that they may encounter in different places, but we also place a significant emphasis on adaptation and effectiveness, and particularly on concepts of operational resilience and psychological resilience. And by operational resilience, I really mean the capacity to continue delivering a clinical service amidst changing and challenging circumstances. Coming from that context, it seems reasonable to me to consider in some ways that COVID-19 can be regarded as a sort of natural disaster, and we can learn quite a lot from the experiences of those who deal with natural disasters either as visitors or as locals to the location of the disaster. Plenty of work has been done in this field. This is just an example of some work done on mental health of health workers before, during and after natural disasters, as an example. Having said that, there are some important ways in which COVID-19 is not, as it were, a normal disaster. One is its global scope. This affects the whole world at more or less the same time, although there has been a little bit of spread across regions. And that means that many of the stressors, particularly on infrastructure and on sourcing equipment, are the same globally. As a corollary of that, no one is coming to help. This is not a disaster where volunteer teams from other countries or other regions are going to arrive and offer additional resources. Alongside that, no one has volunteered for this. This is not like the Médecins Sans Frontières context where somebody has signed up to an organisation and knows, in some form at least, what they're getting into. And finally, and importantly, the UK hasn't experienced this before. We are not a country that is used to overwhelming disasters, and we have far less experience than many parts of the world in that kind of situation. I should say at this point that much of what I'm going to say in the following slides has been drawn from what I've learnt from my colleagues all over the world, but particularly those I've talked with on anaesthesia and related courses who are named here, many of whom have a lot more experience in the field than I do. So I'm privileged to have learned from them, and I hope I have credited them where I've quoted directly as well. What I'd like to do is focus on 3 areas of intentionality which may help us. And by intentionality, I really mean deliberately recognising where we are and what we can learn from experiences others have had, and also acting explicitly and deliberately to handle the challenges which we then recognise. The first area I want to speak about is intentional information handling. Many of us will have had the experience earlier on in this pandemic of being overwhelmed with communications, and that's certainly a common feature in disasters internationally. Existing information processes are easily swamped, making it difficult to discern what important information is there, as opposed to a great deal of noise. We get information from multiple sources which may well be conflicting. Information becomes a political instrument or a mechanism for power dynamics. And it's important to remember the power of the story, especially those of us who are medics. We are comfortable looking at academic papers and appraising them, but stories and narratives have as much power to affect us as anybody. So a single story about a patient or a colleague may in fact be more powerful in changing what we do than a careful set of guidelines or a protocol. How can we act in the light of that? Well, we can value information carefully. We can apply critical appraisal not only to the academic paper, but to all the other sources of information that we're exposed to. We can be careful in sharing information, bearing in mind that fake news is very, very easily transmitted. And very importantly, we can keep open, regular and honest communications going on within the teams that we work in, especially if we are leaders. Our teams will trust us if they think we are being straight with them and telling them what to expect and what has been happening. The second area of intentionality is around self and team care. What do we need to recognise? We need to recognise that existing structures, particularly for self-care, may be lost or inappropriate in this situation of COVID-19. We also need to recognise, among other things, that team bonds are likely to be the best predictor of resilience in crisis and may be superior to individual coping mechanisms. We should recognise that it may not be the particular dangerous or difficult situation, the particular day, which is a difficulty for us and for team members. It may be the ongoing hard work. Or as Chekhov has put it, any idiot can deal with a crisis. It's the day-to-day living that wears you out. So what can we do? Let's be intentional about self-care. Let's review our own self-care and coping mechanisms. Details of those were given brilliantly by Steve Ingham in his talk last week, and I'm not going to go over them again, other than to say it is worth thinking about how you can put healthy habits and safety nets in place. As team leaders and team members, how can we build team bonds? That might include planned and spontaneous opportunities. How can we also help prepare the team? Healthcare workers in particular, who feel prepared for difficult or disastrous situations, are better protected psychologically to cope with those situations. So as we can help people to feel prepared, let's try and do that. Then thirdly, let's be intentionally flexible. And there are two aspects to this. The first is being able to work with low resources. That might well mean an altered quality of care in the short term, which can be hard to come to terms with. It might even mean altered safety of care, affecting the risk-benefit decisions that we need to make about when to proceed and when not to with treatment. Low resources can evolve into scarcity behaviours at individual and corporate levels, but they can also lead to innovation. And I know we have other speakers in this session discussing innovation, so I'm not going to go into more detail there, other than to mention it as a perhaps more preferable consequence of low resources. Secondly, we have to be intentionally flexible amidst a changing situation. It is not just that resources are low, or maybe, it is that they will change over time. And the pace of change may well be new to us. Information will evolve over time as well. So the best option today might be entirely different from the best option yesterday on the information we had yesterday, or next week on the information we will have next week. That's really summed up by one of my colleagues, Rachel Craven, who works regularly with Médecins Sans Frontières. I think you can't emphasise enough the need to be prepared to be flexible as information and situations rapidly change. And those rapid changes in plans are not failure, but simply adaptations to the changing situation. They are frustrating, energy-sapping and tiring, but they're also completely normal. So how do we deal with this need to be flexible in changing situations? We have to try to adjust to a sense of uncertainty or even chaos and acknowledge that. It can help to remember our purpose, as Steve mentioned last week. It's worth being ready or even planning to change the plan. The best plans have to change as situations and information evolves. And alongside that, let's not wait for our plan or our protocol to be perfect to the final full stop before we start. It will have to change in the light of experience. So a plan that is good enough is worth implementing in the rapidly evolving disaster scenario. In summary, let's be intentional as we learn from the humanitarian and the low resource context, where many colleagues have vastly more experience in dealing with difficult situations than we do here. Let's think carefully about information handling, about self and team care, and let's try to maintain and develop our flexibility in low resources and evolving situations. Thank you very much and stay safe.